Pretty much everybody has periods in life when they feel alone. We're up against things that are too hard or too frightening or too demoralizing or too sad. A lot of us probably feel this way a lot more often than seems fair. So various religious and spiritual groups and lines of thinking come along with this idea that we're never actually really alone. That there's a higher love that's looking out for us, that's with us in our struggles, on our side. And this love comes through these beings. Some people call them beings of light or teachers or spirit guide. Swedenborg calls them angels. But if they're here, where are they? I've been looking and they can be pretty tough to spot. And if they're helping us, how are they doing it? And is there any way we can open that channel of communication more? Those are great questions. I'm glad you asked, and we're going to do our best to take a look at it tonight. Stay tuned. All right, don't panic, because you probably just noticed that we changed rooms. We have a brand new background. It was great to put that up. Hope you enjoy it. It'll help us move through our topics and everything in a precise, produced something format. Okay, enough about that. Welcome to the show. My name is Curtis Childs. I'm with the Swedenborg Foundation, which is a nonprofit group that works to hold discussions like this one. If you want to be part of this discussion, get your questions and comments in. Remember, we have a live question and answer period at the end of the show. We took a week off. Hope you guys were okay. We're really glad to be back. I'm really glad to be back. And this is a cool topic, I think, today, because we're talking about angels. And people have different associations with that word. We tried to, in the beginning, set up that there's a lot of different names for the phenomenon that we're talking about. And we're going to take a look at what Swedenborg described of angels and their interaction with human beings, and hear from some other people that have had interactions of their own. So I feel like if we're going to get into this topic, we first have to take a look at what these beings want. I want to include this section because you have to be correct emotionally, or the stuff that follows isn't going to fall in line or in the right way, because we're going to be talking a little bit about things that are a little bit more technical, like the mechanism of how communication happens, and you don't want to get the sense that that's the way these angels are. We want to first talk about what their heart is like, what their emotional stance is towards other people, towards us, because that makes everything else follow in sequence. So you got to have that in your mind as we discuss all these sort of metaphysical. It was written a long time ago. It's cool to get a little bit of a description from people who have seen, interacted with beings like this recently. So this is a little clip from a guy who had a near-death experience. He recorded it, and this is a segment of it that deals with angels and does a good job of getting across the feel. What is it actually like to hang out with angels? So here he is.
Two angels came, and on each side, and huge, humongous, very wide, very tall. They would get the height of the tunnel. And they just said, "Don't worry, you're okay. All is well. We're here with you, and we love you." And it felt really peaceful, no control. When it's like this, you have no control about anything. You just let it be, and it's just beautiful to let it be.
So don't worry, it's okay. We're here with you, and we love you. That's the message. You could stop watching now. I'm gonna let you stop if you want. That's the message. That's the attitude. That's what all this stuff falls under in the future. So keep that in mind as we discuss the sort of the mechanisms and that kind of thing going forward. And that's the good news, man. Swedenborg talks about angels a ton. You're not going to go anywhere in his writings without coming across angels. He reported being able to discuss things with angels, interact with angels on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, and he has a lot recorded about them. I wanted to bring up a quote from his Secrets of Heaven 454, which kind of takes this farther, this sentiment we just saw in the near-death experience. What do angels want? What do they do? Like, if they're going to hang out, if they have a free Saturday, what do they do? So this is what he describes kind of their jobs. Angelic life consists in usefulness and acts of neighborly kindness. Nothing makes angels happier than giving information to spirits newly arrived from the world and teaching them. Serving people on earth, making sure that the evil spirits present do not go too far. And for more on that, watch our show on evil spirits. We had a couple episodes back. Inspiring them with good and reviving the dead as they enter eternal life, eventually taking them to heaven if the condition of their souls allows it. Angels find more happiness in these activities than can ever be described. In performing them, they become images of the Lord. In performing them, they love their neighbor more than themselves, and this makes heaven. So angels are not aloof, they're not uninterested in people, they're not just happy to look at clouds. Like these are activists, these are people that if anybody's suffering, they want to stop it. And that's what it's about. So I feel like it's important to nail that down initially. So there's a description. Let's hear again from a person who had another interaction with angels. This goes into the description of two specific beings that this woman saw in her near-death experience.
I found myself in a very loving place. I went back there a third time. And I found myself in this rolling hills, these beautiful rolling hills of like memory foam. When you lie down on it, it was like nothing that I've ever felt, just total peace. And this being came up to me, genderless, very, very powerful, loving being, who just took me in its arms and held me, loving me for just exactly who I am, my quirks, my virtues, my strengths, my weaknesses, everything about me. Just totally, you are, and I love you the way you are. That total acceptance, that total, I wouldn't have to change anything about me or be anything else because I was loved for exactly who I was. And by its side was a kind of male being who was like a protector. And that protector was saying, you're completely safe.
So does that seem like it was a benign experience to her? I mean, you can feel the emotion there, that to be in the presence is to sort of have a new level of care and of love introduced to you. This is a big deal. And everything that they said and everything in the last clip was it's about, hey, we're looking out for you. We're going to help you out. Don't worry about it. They're not focused on something else. They're focused on us and caring for us. So that's a pretty good deal. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning about angels and what they want is they don't want to point out our flaws. There's been a lot of religious kind of stuff talking about other people and how they do things wrong, and that's sort of been the essence of religion in some cases, and that is not what angels are like, and that's not the heavenly mindset as Swedenborg describes it. He writes in Secrets of Heaven 1079, those who are guided by kindness, on the other hand, hardly even notice evil in another, but pay attention instead to everything good and true in the person. When they do find anything bad or false, they put a good interpretation on it. This is a characteristic of all angels, one they acquire from the Lord, who bends everything bad towards good. So, and it doesn't mean angels have love and wisdom, Swedenborg describes. So it's not a naive approach where they just won't notice anything bad someone's doing or enable bad behavior. But the love is central, and they're not interested in pointing out flaws, or they're not. It's not like, if you're good enough, then I'll think you're cool. We're interested in helping. We're not thinking we're higher than anybody. So let's pull up a little tally of what we got so far. Angels love everyone, don't hate anyone, and they're humble. And we didn't necessarily talk about this in the quotes, but Swedenborg says everything that angels do, they want the credit to go to God. They're not interested in raising their profile. They're not interested in, I'm just being nice to this person because I'm going to campaign for Angel of the Week or something like that. They're just about the function, about the service. So that's the joy, the central joy of their lives. That's a big part of the angelic mindset. So we got one final person who's seen this phenomenon in action, and that pumped this guy up so much that he wanted to sing about it. We're going to segment of it, but there's a whole song he goes on, but this part is about angels. So let them, pick up the melody in stride, because we haven't had time to introduce it. So 3, 2, 1, here you go.
What more happened over there? Touched by the angels high above, must have felt beyond compare, bathing in the light of total love. It's an awesome feeling of inner peace and happiness, a euphoric feeling, such joy I feel inside. Did the angels say goodbye? Yes, they said I must return. Did they give a reason why? I still had a lot to learn. So what do you think of dying? Don't be afraid now, do not fear it. Tell the truth, please, don't be lying. The body dies, but not the spirit. It's an awesome feeling of inner peace and happiness, a euphoric feeling.
And he goes from there to rock out. There's like a key change. It's a big deal. But that guy's awesome. And you can see he's so pumped that he's like looking at the camera a little bit as he delivers his last line, because that's the moral. So he had this experience, and that's a vintage piece of footage. He's like, I think it's copied off a VHS tape, it looks like. So it's just cool to see this guy decided this is the only way I can put it into words. And you see these other people who are describing, when they're describing what the angels did in our first 2 clips, they say something, then it's a long pause. Then they say something, because there's this emotional trying to find the words for it. So it's an important experience. That's the experience of angels. Take all these factoids that we're going to throw at you and lump it into that. Understand that they exist under the umbrella of that love, and you'll have the clearest picture of the angel phenomenon. Okay, so we took a look at that and what they want. Now let's start to move into the communication side of things. We're going to take a look at the limits and the mechanisms. All right, I'm going to kick this thing off with just a piece of art that every once in a while I get to make something, and I made this one. So let's take a look. This is a diagram that I made in Keynote. No, it wasn't those clouds. It's going to go over those clouds. It was so great that it crashed our computer software, I think. And this is a description of levels. Swedenborg talks a lot about levels. And he we couldn't quite get it that time. He talks about, I'll keep setting it up as we pull it together, and then you'll see it. And all this hype that we have here is worth it when you see the diagram. I can't describe it. It's like an angel. That's how beautiful the diagram is. So there are these levels that Swedenborg talks about in heaven. And this is level, there it is. Oh my goodness, those arrows. Okay, was it worth it? Thank you. You can donate to the Swedenborg Foundation. So this is a picture of the flow of life and the flow of consciousness. The diagram itself is of something cool, schematic as it is. So you notice from God to our soul or our inner being, there is a direct inflow. Everybody's got this. God is flowing into everybody. However, the route to our conscious mind is a little more circuitous. You have these different levels that it goes through. And Swedenborg always says there's 3 levels in heaven, then the world of spirits, then us. He changes what he names those levels. For this one, we're calling them heavenly angels, spiritual angels, natural angels. And the original truth comes from God and moves down these levels, because as it is from God, we just couldn't understand it. But it goes into heavenly angels. These are people with their minds as close to open as you can get. Then from there, that's just at the top reach of what the spiritual angels can get, and that's just at the top reach of the natural angels. Goes to good spirits in the world of spirits. So that's the place that we're really just getting into some taxonomy here, but that's the place Swedenborg describes where you go immediately after death. You're not in heaven or hell yet. Good spirits there, and that is how it gets into our consciousness. So it's this big, long chain, because communication is complex. If you think about the mechanisms and machinery communicating this show to you right now, there's a lot of moving parts. And so similarly, the consciousness connection is not just this, like a little tube. There's a similar complexity to it. And that is what leads to these levels. And Swedenborg says some things about it here and why it's like this. This is from Secrets of Heaven, 1642. And we're moving right into the middle when he's talking about how spirits talk. And this is from his experiences with spirits and how spirits can say things as quickly as we can think, because in thought, we're in the world of spirits. So this then is the way spirits talk. But the speech of angelic spirits is even more universal and perfect. And the speech of angels still more so. So this is going up those levels he was talking about. There are 3 heavens, as noted before. Good spirits inhabit the first, angelic spirits the second, and angels the third. Perfection increases as it rises, so that superficial elements have almost the same relation to deeper ones as hearing, to illustrate by comparison, has to sight, and sight has to thought. And he explains that here. What the ear can absorb from speech in an hour, so like what I'm saying to you guys right now, can be presented to the eye in a minute. A panorama of fields, mansions, and cities, for instance. So you can see things quicker than you can hear them by words. And what the eye takes many hours to observe, the thought can grasp in a minute. The speech of spirits bears the same ratio to that of angelic spirits, and the speech of angelic spirits to that of angels. Angelic spirits incorporate more clear, distinct concepts into one idea, spoken or thought, than spirits cover in several thousand, and angels outdo angelic spirits to the same degree. How must it be with the Lord, then, the source of all the life in our feelings, thoughts, and speech, the one who alone is the message and the word? So a lot of terminology in there, and if you're just, what are the levels? What the basic message is, the mind of God is incredibly complex, and it comes down through these filters. The way that the highest angels are thinking is just a little above and beyond, so potent and so fast that we couldn't grasp it as it is, but it moves down to people who can in different levels, and then it gets to us at like sort of the highest reaches of our consciousness, symbolic, and then that's how it gets into our regular thoughts. So that's what he's saying about that. And he talks further about how there would be this sort of unintelligibility between the spiritual thinking and our thinking, this is the reason we're spending time on this. This is why we don't just have God popping up in the living room, or why don't he just come on this show and tell everyone this is how it works, right? This is why angels don't just show up and say, well, this is what you got to do and this is why, because there's this translation that has to happen. So Swedenborg talks about it more in Divine Love and Wisdom 295. The following experience taught me what kind of difference there is between angels' thoughts and our thoughts. They were told to think about something spiritually and then tell me what they had been thinking. So he's talking to angels and he's telling them, hey, run this experiment. Once they had done this and tried to tell me, they could not. And they explained that they could not articulate it. The same thing held true for both their spiritual speech and their spiritual writing. There was not a single word of spiritual speech that resembled a word of earthly speech, and no element of spiritual writing that resembled earthly writing except the letters, and each of these contained a complete meaning. So, he goes on to say, remarkably enough, though, they told me that they seemed to themselves to be thinking and talking and writing in their spiritual state the same way we do in our earthly state, even though there is no similarity whatever. I could see from this that what is earthly and what is spiritual differ as to vertical level, and they communicate with each other only through correspondences. And if you've hung out around the show at all, we talk about correspondences a lot. And we bring up this topic, which in a nutshell, I probably say that too much, but it's a great phrase, in a nutshell, because a lot of times you got to put things in nutshells. And this, in a nutshell, is correspondences means objects can symbolize thoughts. The spiritual concepts can be represented analogously through objects, right? So that's what it is. And the only way this communication down that diagram that we showed earlier can happen is through these correspondences. And in this, when he's talking about spiritual angels, around each other, they're talking, they're yucking it up, they're writing. It seems like just as normal and native as anything. But when they try to tell that to Swedenborg, what they were talking about, because Swedenborg is in a natural state of mind, it just can't go through. And I think it could be something like you're in a dream and there's something that makes sense, but you try to explain it to somebody. Have you ever had that? You try to explain a part of your dream and it just doesn't make any sense, or you just can't case it in words. I think it would be something along that scale of phenomena. So there's a couple places where he talks about the mechanism, and it's interesting in looking at some limitations. We've heard that free will thing, and that there's sort of a respect. You can't just be told everything, or you can't be pushed in a certain direction because you've got to choose that freely. If you noticed, or if you've been watching the show, as I referenced earlier in this program, a couple episodes back, we did a show that was called How to Deal with Evil Spirits. And it was basically looking at the counterpart to angels that Swedenborg described all over his writings as well. And in that episode, we talked about the voices of schizophrenic patients and how they matched up a lot with these evil spirits in the ways that they behaved. When we quoted from Wilson Van Dusen, who was a psychologist who was doing these experiments where he interviewed the voices of patients by asking patients, if I ask this, what do the voices say? And they would go back and forth. Really fascinating stuff. This is a part we didn't get to in the other episode when he talks about what he calls higher order hallucinations, meaning this is different than the voices that are crass and lower. This is something different, and I think it lines up with angels or good spirits like Swedenborg was talking about. So this is from Wilson Van Dusen's book, The Presence of Other Worlds. In direct contrast stands the rarer, higher orders of the patient's experiences. The contrast may be illustrated by the experience of one man. He had heard the lower order arguing a long while how they would murder him. He also had a light come to him at night like the sun. He knew it was different. It was a different order because the light respected his freedom and would withdraw if it frightened him. In contrast, the lower order worked against his will and would attack as if it could see fear in him. This rarer, higher order seldom speaks, whereas the lower order can be talk endlessly. The higher order is much more likely to be symbolic, religious, supportive, genuinely instructive, and communicate directly with the inner feelings of the patient. So this direct communication and this symbolism, that these come through there, and that's like this chain of ideas that we're talking about, that there's a difference between the way the negative and positive sides communicate with us. And if you can start to notice parts in your thoughtscape that behave in similar ways, often positive thoughts, positive feelings, positive beliefs about yourself and others, they're not as loud and pushy. They're a little more subtle, but perhaps that's because they're mimicking their source. So those were a few cool things that we thought. And as we were putting this episode together, Chelsea, who works at the foundation, told this story about a dream, like a really vivid dream, one of those, hey, this feels like more than a dream, dreams that she had about her mother after her mother had passed away, that highlights some of this communication thing and how there's nuances to the communication process. And it was just cool. So we asked her to say it in front of the camera, and so we're going to play it for you now because I think it adds to this discussion here. So here it is.
My mom died when I was 10, and in those next 2 years, I ended up having a series of dreams where I really feel more convinced they were like out-of-body experiences, even though I went into them after I had gone to sleep, and in which I met her. And the first one, we were in my home, and she was actually doing something she would have normally been doing had she been alive, and she looked like she was when she was alive, only before she got sick. And then it was one of the later ones, when I met her, she was able to tell me, if you ever want to see me, here's what you do. And it was this very little childish thing where I left something out for her, and if I went and looked for it in my dream, like I was able to have some pretty lucid dreams when I was this age. If I went and looked for it, and it wasn't there, then I knew I could find her somewhere in the house. And so one of these dreams, in my dream, it was lucid, and so I was like, oh, I'm gonna go check and see if this thing that I left for my mom is there or not. And I went and looked, and it was actually, I had to go like down this passage to find it, and it wasn't there, and so that meant I could go look for her somewhere. And so I came up and I found her in one of our rooms, and this moment when I saw her, in contrast to that first dream, her look had changed. She was like glowing. Her hair color changed from, just a regular sort of dirty blonde to this more like heightened contrast of like orange and blonde colors. When I saw her, I really wanted to just reach out and hug her, but I had this feeling like I couldn't reach her. And she spoke to me, and when she opened her mouth and spoke, it was like all these harmonies happening at once, or all these sounds. I couldn't hug her, but meet me in the other room. She disappeared, and so I went to the other room, which was across the hall. And when I went into that room, she was sitting on the bed, and but her whole state had changed. She didn't have the glow anymore. Her hair color was the normal thing. She was wearing normal clothes, whereas before it was sort of like glowing clothes. It was much more natural looking, and I just knew I was able to run up and actually give her a hug, and that was sort of the completion of the dream.
So did you get that whole thing? I don't know if we might have had a little skipping there in the broadcast. To summarize, Chelsea was having these really vivid dreams with her mother, and she had a series of them. And in the one we were looking at, her mom's appearance had changed. She had gotten this like sort of new hair and was in these like fancy clothes. And when she tried to communicate with Chelsea, she opened her mouth and it was this all these harmonies of noise or of sounds, or like a bunch of bells ringing. It was too much. It was too much overload. But then she said, but Chelsea could hear in her mind, "Meet me in another room." And when she went to the other room, she and Chelsea could hug. And I just think, it's a really cool dream, first of all, but meet me in another room of a house. I mean, a house is common dream imagery for the mind. To say, hey, this is too much for you to see me in my whatever angelic state here, so meet me in this other room and other part of the mind, and we can hug. So I think that was cool. Thanks to Chelsea for that. All right, so we've taken a look at some of these limits and mechanisms. So if this is how angels communicate, is there a way that we can open ourselves up to this communication, or how do we look for it, as we're going to take a look at next. All right, so here's the how-to part. We're going to give you a 3-step guide to get through this. This is easy 3 steps, but it's a terrible guide because the steps aren't even all steps. I mean, one of them is just sort of an observation. They don't really follow in sequence, but it's just cool to say this is your handy-dandy 3-step guide to how to get angels to affect your thoughts in 2 minutes or less. Okay, so step number one is instinct. We're going to talk about instinct. And to set that up, I want to talk about basket weaving. So, and you guys could probably see that coming, right? Basket weaving. If my name is Curtis, if I wanted to start basket weaving, that would be very hard for me. If somebody gave me like a bunch of grass and said, make an Easter basket with this, that would not happen. I wouldn't be able to even get started on something like that. And even if I was being taught, it would take a lot of teaching to do. However, there are these things that are called birds. And some of birds can make things like this with grass, and they can do it without hands, and they can do it without ever being taught, and not even having to watch adults do it in any detail. A bird can learn how to do this. Not to mention, a little tiny organism called a spider can make something as geometrically beautiful as this without ever having to go to a class. It's not like hey mom, can I come with you to the web shop today and you show me how to spin? It's not like that. They just know how to do it. And Swedenborg says that instinct comes because animals are living in the order of their life, as he puts it. So a bird is doing what a bird is supposed to do. A spider does what a spider is supposed to do. But people are not necessarily doing what we're supposed to do. And what that is explained here. Secrets of Heaven 6:3-3. The good effects of love, which flow in from the Lord through angels, contain all truth. And this truth would spontaneously reveal itself if we lived a life of love for the Lord and love for our neighbor. This fact is visible not only from phenomena in heaven, but also phenomena on the lower rungs of nature. The lower natural phenomena are in plain sight, so let me select examples from them to cite as illustrations. However, we just did that. We already did the citing thing. But what he's saying is, in some near-death experiences, people will say, I suddenly knew everything. I knew all this truth. I had all this knowledge. And Swedenborg says, if we were in the order of our lives, which he calls love to the Lord and love to the neighbor, which in Swedenborgianese means love of helping the human race and love of knowledge or the truth or the means to do so. If we were doing that, if we were living as the human being was intended to, we would get knowledge on love and how to do things like animals get instinct. That's what Swedenborg says anyway. So it's not really a step. As I said, this is not a great 3-step guide. It's not really something you can do except knowing that, hey, if the more we live towards love, we maybe get more intuition or more just sort of, oh yeah, I know what to do here. That can be a side effect of love. And it's just good to know that, hey, someday if the human race swings around, we won't ever need to have shows like this one because we'll already know what we're doing. So that's step 1. Step 2, if you want to get angels to affect your thoughts, pay attention to your purposes or your goals or what you're focused on in life. Swedenborg says in Secrets of Heaven 5:8-5:4, the Lord provides that spirits influence our thoughts and wishes. Remember again, that great diagram, the world of spirits is the closest one to us. Spirits influence our thoughts and wishes, but that angels influence ultimate goals, and through our goals, the consequences that results. Angels also flow through good spirits